So I'm curious to know what's your perspective, because you have two kids and you are running businesses and you have so many responsibilities and roles that you are. So I'm curious, how does it work with you and kids, and how do you accomplish all of the goals that you have for yourself?
You need to be really secure in who you are, because if you fail, sometimes you get unlucky. There's so many other factors. And there will be some fool who will point it out and laugh. And I guarantee you they're the biggest loser who's never taken a risk. Worse than losing a good opportunity is taking one that drains you completely and takes up all your time away from the one that was going to come tomorrow or a week later and totally crushes your ability to perform in that one.
Hello, everyone. This is Annanesterovapodcast, and welcome to my podcast. On today's episode, my guest is Olga Jilani. She is a co-founder and senior advisor at Switch Health. It's a Canadian company. I just have to mention it because I have people from all over the world. And she is a former VP of Sinclair Range, and she was also an analyst in Dandy Capital Markets. And today, I am welcoming her to join me on this episode. And we will talk about her story, and we will dive into her journey as a businesswoman, as a self-made entrepreneur. And we will talk about actually lots of interesting things. We'll see how the conversation will go. Hi, Olga. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Well, as I said, you have a big list of achievements, and I want to talk about those. I know we won't have enough time, but we discussed a main theme of our conversation as a perseverance and persistence. And I think that definitely defines the successes that you've made in your career path and in your life. And I would love to hear your perspective and share your story with my audience. So let's dive in right away into your story, into your journey. And I love to start with your background. And I love to hear how you started, how you got where you are right now, and maybe tell us a little bit more where you're from. Where did you go to school, and how you ended up into being such an entrepreneurial spirit and such an entrepreneur and built so many amazing things, have done so many things.
Excellent. We'll start from the beginning. And thank you for such a generous introduction. So my background, I moved when I was a kid. I was 8 years old, and that's the age that my oldest daughter is now. So it's interesting to watch her, knowing that that's where I was when the biggest change in my life happened. My parents immigrated from Russia to a beautiful town in 1996 called Madison, Wisconsin. America's Dairyland, quintessential Midwest. I learned English there, and I have the best memories of Madison. And I even joke with my mom, my kids graduate, I'm moving back to Madison, Wisconsin. It was an amazing experience. I learned English, I kid you not, in 2 to 3 weeks. It was a total immersion program. They were some of the kindest, sweetest people. And in fact, I was 8 years old. I moved to Chicago. My parents moved to Chicago when I was 10, left all of that behind. And I still correspond with the people that I went to grade 3 and grade 4 with, which is just a testament to the warmth of that Midwest spirit, that hospitality. It's incredible. And I still crave it. And that's in Toronto. I feel the same thing, maybe not to the same extent, especially now it's trying to work a little harder to be cool. But that's kind of how we started out. When I was 12, we moved to Toronto, and we've lived here ever since. I was talking to someone about this the other day, and I realized that I have actually not gone to a single school before high school for more than 2 years. So I was always the new girl, and for better or for worse, but it definitely helped me adapt. It was hard to have old friends because I moved around so much, and for continuity. So that was a little bit of a struggle, but it teaches a kid to be a little bit more flexible, make friends, be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that is something that holds almost all immigrant stories together, that you forego certain comforts of being at your home country, or I guess home as people still call it. I don't call it home anymore, and I haven't in a very long time. Whereas you give it up for potential for your children or for yourself to have a safer, happier, healthier life. So I I like your podcast, and that I think all of your guests do have a common thread of perseverance and, fall down seven, get up eight that's one of my favorite phrases. But I think there's also an element of being a risk taker. Humility is a very big one. And always like giving it 100% because, it will it could fail if you give 100%, but you're not guaranteed success, and there's no guarantees in life, and that's just something that I think immigration in general teaches you. You can tick all the boxes and it still won't work out. But what I actually want to focus on, I think you and I talked about this, is that I want to talk about my failures, because you see so many success stories, and I think the wrong takeaway from that is if someone makes it look easy, it's because it was easy. And the reality is, the easier it looks, the harder someone worked in the moment and prepared and, stayed up at night thinking about these things to make it come together as a whole. So the easier it looks, the harder someone else is working behind the scenes, behind the smile, behind the discussion, behind the presentation. And that's really what it is. When my parents immigrated, both my parents have a master's education. My mom's an ecologist by, degree, and my dad's a hydrologist. And when they came, and I very rarely talk about this part, I think the only time I started talking about it was high school. My dad was a taxi driver in Chicago, and my mom worked as a nanny, because that's the immigrant experience, and that's what you learn to do. And
Why did they decide to immigrate in the first place? Can you share that? So what was the
yeah,
reason?
yeah. So in Russia, people, talk about how tough they are when they're from some large metropolitan American city. I think that's there's a stack of them. And I said, yeah, but in like the 90s, we just didn't have a government. Like we didn't, and it was total chaos. And that was really their motivation. So they had an existing relationship with someone who they met in university who was American. They had a little business. Um, my parents were part of a group that opened up Avon Cosmetics to all of Eastern Europe, which was a weird time of reconstruction and opening up of a new, very large and interested market. And so they used it as an opportunity to leave. The 90s in all of Russia, I think all of the former Soviet Union, was a really tough time because there was no element of law enforcement. I'm not going to go into the details of it. I think it's just like
Mhm.
Wikipedia covers it pretty well, but it really was a difficult time to be able to survive, and it became very dangerous at some point, and
Mhm.
that's why we left. So, and then when we moved to Canada, my dad, he became a truck driver because, you get the job that you have to, put the food on the table for your family. He obviously didn't like it. It didn't, stimulate him, and that was his sacrifice. And my mom became a computer programmer. She's like a systems architect, and that's kind of I think that's what it is, but a computer programmer. That's what she's done for the last 20-ish years. So that's me in a nutshell. But I think kind of the takeaway that you get from your parents, and I think about it as like, I'm 35 now, and they were younger than I am now when they, made the leap. And I think of like how terrifying that is. Like I wouldn't, I mean, if the circumstances were dire, I would, but that's terrifying to me to be like, okay, cool, we're gonna leave everything. We're gonna take this amount of money in our bank account, and we're gonna hope for the best,
Yeah.
right? And you only start to think about it like having kids, and like, well, what do you do with your kids? What do you do when they come in contact with other children in a new land? Like, weird experience.
Yeah.
So that's my background. I went to public school here. Toronto's fantastic. And I went to a little place called the Schulich School of Business right out of high school. I really, really enjoy the program. I really enjoy the people that I was surrounded with. I don't know if I necessarily had a goal in mind. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had really good grades. Schulich was a great school. And so I went to Schulich.
Mhm.
And final year, we're talking about failures and perseverance. I went on exchange to Norway for like 6 months, lived abroad. It was great, pass fail. So final year, decided I wanted to be either an investment banker or a consultant. And I think all of those jobs have in the same interview. more or less. And they have the one big question in them. Why do you want to be a consultant / why do you want to be an investment banker? And why don't you want to be the other one? Because really, from like an analyst standpoint, there's so many similarities. I think investment bankers, like at a lower level, travel a lot less. I probably work a lot more hours. Like it's 120 hours a week. You need to be prepared for it. Prepares you really well to function on limited sleep. So you're all set to be taking care of an infant. Really prepared me for motherhood, ironically enough. But there was at one point, I don't know why even, but I really wanted to work for the Boston Consulting Group. And at that point, I was a big believer that if you wanted to stand out, and this is like 1,000 resumes for like one position, if not more,
Yeah.
you need to do something crazy. And I'm even a more believer in that philosophy now than I was then. That if you're gonna go for something great, you're gonna have to go 110%. You might fall flat on your face in front of everyone, but not giving 110 is just not gonna cut it.
Yep.
And you need to do something completely different. Your angle has to be different. So I made a website called BCG Hire Me instead of just handing in my resume.
Oh, I love that.
True story.
Love that.
I don't know what happened to that site since, but just don't go on it. They actually took notice of that, and it made me stand out, and I got really good feedback specifically because of that. Like, we want someone who comes up with different solutions, who's not afraid to stick their neck out, who's, ready to go 110 because we have these incredibly high profile clients. You can't come in with some boilerplate ideas. They really are a great company. I ended up not getting the job, and I was devastated because a bunch of people I went to school with did. I wouldn't say like a bunch, maybe like 5 or something. I was devastated. I cried. And my parents were like, "What? You think like this is over?" And it's so silly because I think about it now and I'm like, what did I think? Like this was just the end of the world? Like it's either this or nothing? Like for sure there was going to be a landing point. And sure enough, I had a bunch of banking interviews, and this was like September of 4th year. October rolls around. I had really good like final rounds, and it didn't hit. And I think like I might have missed on technicals. Like my technicals weren't very strong. If you've ever been through an investment banking interview, there's fit, and there's like how well do you really know your accounting? How well do you know the markets, accretive, dilutive, the whole thing. That's a me fault. I wasn't technically prepared as much as I should have been. Oh, also it's 2010. Sorry, 2009 was a recession. There's like no jobs. And I ended up getting an interview because I went to high school with a girl who worked there at Dundee Capital Markets. And Dundee was a really good place. It's something else now. Ned Goodman passed away, who was kind of like a figurehead there. And I still have incredible connections with everyone I worked for there. But Dundee was really good for hard assets. So if you were into real estate, metals and mining, oil and gas, amazing. Mm-hmm. So I had all these interviews, it went really well, and they were just as intense as the boutique shop, not a bank-owned dealer. And my final one was with a guy who, he's still amazing and became a CFO of one of like our former clients. And then he went on to lead Cantor Fitzgerald. Like he was an incredible person. He was very technically smart, very personable. So he was a whole package. But he was kind of tasked with grilling on technicals. So he was the last guy to sign off of like whether this person is technically competent, which is a big deal because you don't want to have to be explaining enterprise value at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. And I go up to this 28th floor of like Adelaide, of Dundee Place, 1 Adelaide East. And I'm all dressed up, and it's a G8 protest. So this is like June 2010. And we sit down, and you get like it's a beautiful, big, kind of darkish boardroom with the windows are closed, and it's the ergonomic chairs, so they kind of like bounce up and down as you move around, like as like nice boardroom. And they give me a glass of water, and they give him a glass of water. It's fine, and we start doing this, and he starts grilling like right out the gate, and I'm knocking these out. Everything's going fine, and he started explaining something to me about, I think like, I even remember this. He starts explaining to me what a difference between a bought deal and a marketed deal is. And he said, "Do you know the difference?" And I said, "No, I don't." He's like, "Well, I actually don't expect you to. It's not covered in standard finance curriculums. I'll just explain it to you so you can have like a good lay, and then I'll have a question after. I'm like, cool. So he's explaining it. Don't get me wrong. He was harsh, but he was very nice. So you can be both. And I look at my water glass, and the water is like there's ripples in the water, like as if someone's shaking it. And they become a lot more, like they become larger. And this guy's still just talking to me about bot deals. And then I feel like my chair is starting to shake a little bit. And I was like, oh my God. And he's just like life goes, the show must
Nothing
go on.
happens.
He's still going, nothing. So I came to the conclusion, I'm 22. I came to the conclusion that I've lost my mind. And I'm just going to have to pretend that I'm sane. And we're going to finish this, which, by the way, is how I would describe capital markets in general. What happened was it was the day of the earthquake in Toronto, and all of this like fell apart. And I only found out when not fell apart, but like my mind. But it started shaking. This is what was happening. Like I'm on the 28th floor of this building, and I didn't find out until I got downstairs. And my mom called me. She's like, "Are you okay? Like, is the dog okay? Because there was an earthquake." I was like, "Oh my God!" Like I'm so glad someone called it out. So I got that job. And when I met him after I was hired, like we worked on a lot of projects together. I said, "Hey, that interview? Why didn't you say like?" I was like, "Why didn't you say something?" But like, "Hey, did you not notice that?" And he's like, "No, I was so focused on this interview that it totally like it's just like I didn't notice until I came downstairs, and everyone was like, 'Hey, like, how did that earthquake interview go?'" And there were jokes like he was super sweet. He would be like, "Well, when you and I, this is why we work together so well, because when we met, like the earth shook." Like so
Yes.
it became this joke, but in the moment I was like, I've lost my marbles, and we're just gonna have to deal with it later after this interview is done. So that was kind of my like run up to Dundee.
Yeah. Well, that's incredible. And actually, that shows also the focus and how, even under those conditions, you can just still like, you know what? Yeah, let's go with it.
I remember like I just answered the question, and I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's how it works in a bought deal based on what you just told me and my moment of panic. Like,
Yeah.
so it
That's
worked
awesome.
out. Yeah.
That's awesome. I guess I have a couple of questions for you from here. So, first of all, why did you want to enter the capital markets, and why did you want to be in investment banking? What was the idea behind it? Because obviously you go to business school, but you have so many other options. What drawing you to it?
It's a great question because I don't think I knew at the time either. I knew what I didn't want to be, and it was more of a process elimination. Capital markets, you didn't have to be tied to a specific industry group, which was a big win for me. I wanted to try everything. It was and that was the case. And then when I settled on mining, it was just pure metals and mining. It was interesting to try something else. It was high pressure. I had the grades for it, frankly, and it was kind of why not? I genuinely to this day loved Excel. I like the model building. I like putting it together when everything is color coded and neatly organized. And that it just kind of spoke to an organization, high intensity job. I think a lot of it was ego, and you need to recognize that. And that's okay if the part of your drive is to feel good about what you're doing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but you have to be honest about it, because when things don't work out, you need to recalibrate your priorities and reevaluate
Yeah.
how much ego should be playing a role in
Yeah.
what you're doing. And I left capital markets because I was 25. I had spent my early 20s working like nonstop. I mean, it was a miracle when I showed up to like a friend's dinner. And that was like, it was enough for me. And I remember when I started working with Scott Sinclair, who introduced us both,
Yeah.
one of the things he said to me is that if we work together, he's like, I work on much smaller deals, but I'm 100% of that deal. There will be no press release to feed your ego, which is what press releases are meant to do by design. There will be, and I told him, the harder I work and the more successful I get, I find that I don't get happier. I don't become happier. And he said, that's a really great realization to have at 25, because he's like, I don't think I had that until much later in life, but this is absolutely the truth. You need to find a source of happiness from something else. And I think that's his mantra. I mean, on his podcast, he talks about it. Purpose, not ego, is a source of
Yes.
happiness.
Yeah.
So um, that was kind of why I left. But he flagged it very early on that if, ego is what keeps you going, there's nothing to feed. There's not going to be a whole lot to feed your ego
Yeah.
under my
It's not
roof. And
sustainable.
that's fine.
Yeah. Interesting though. It's first of all, it's amazing that you can recognize it. And like you said, there's nothing wrong with it as long as you're honest with yourself. But I'm curious if that comes also from that desire to achieve something because you are potentially or coming from the family of immigrants. I'm just curious if that has roots in that too. Because I think for someone who starts out life in a new place, new country, or you wanted to do something for yourself and you don't have that maybe support as much as you wish you had sometimes. Maybe you did. I'm just speculating right now. You want to actually achieve and you want to show up and build your name for yourself, right? Because you're coming to something very competitive, like it's a competitive industry, like you said, very demanding, and you want to be that person who can perform, can show, and achieve. So I'm just curious to know where that comes from. That's all. Like I'm wondering, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, the notion of establishment, I think, is a big one where you leave your mark, or I mean, you're an analyst, like it's a very lucrative role. I highly recommend anyone goes for it. But I think you're right that you feel the need to leave your mark somewhere or to have a little piece of that community. I was fortunate enough to go to university on full scholarship academically. And I was big on my parents have sacrificed enough for me. I always had jobs and everything else. I didn't want to ask them for money anymore.
Yeah.
And for sure, investment banking facilitated that mantra to continue on with that. And when I lived with my parents for a substantial amount of time because it's nice to have someone to cook your meals and do your laundry when you're sleeping 3 hours a day. I paid them rent. Above market, I'll note, but I paid them rent to live in a room in their house because it's not, and they never gave it back to me when I got married or anything like that. It was just to be able to say, like, I'm contributing to what we are as a unit. And we were so close. We're also very close in age. Um, yeah, that was a driver to be able to say, like, they no longer owe me anything anymore. Like, this is done. Like, they've done their part and I don't expect anything else.
Yeah. Was that coming from your own self reassuring feeling, like I want to
Yeah.
be myself, right? So that's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
internal. Yeah. Because I can relate to it 100% because it's just
Absolutely.
like, this is who I am now. I'm an adult and I want to do it for myself. So to me, like, that's a sign of, I also think it's a sign of, I don't know, is it a wisdom or some sort of a smart way of building your life too? Not
Yeah.
relying on someone else. Just the sooner you can start, the better it is. Anyways, but that's an amazing story, and I want to know. So that journey, obviously, that gave you so much knowledge, working so much, seeing so many deals, being part of that process. I'm sure it taught you so much, which helped you eventually in your
Yeah.
career path. I'm sure those 3 years you said, like, they were probably the most
Close to
valuable in
that. Yeah.
terms of
Yeah.
experience. So, but the next step is like, how do you take risks and start something new, leave something that's lucrative, interesting, something you wanted to have, and yet you need to make a next step. And it seems like you've had a series of those steps, right? Like, you've changed things around, you were entrepreneurial, you were also starting companies, you were also probably investing on your own. Again, I'm
Yeah.
assuming, know what I know, and obviously assuming some stuff. So what does it take to take those risks and make those moves? And like, what was behind your decision-making process? Like, why you wanted to do more? Because some people would stay where they are. They would be happy, right? They're like, oh, I make enough money. I can do this. I can progress. People value me. I can, close deals and I'm happy. So, but you were
Yeah.
not that. So I'm curious to know.
So I think with my work with Scott, we worked together. It's funny because we effectively met on Twitter and we worked together for over 7 years. And he loves that story. I want to go back to the fact that I don't think entrepreneurship or risk taking is for everyone. And like, first, you can learn a lot from entrepreneurs, but you don't have to become them. Like, I can learn to dribble better from LeBron, but I have my own limitations as to why I can't dunk. And I think um in SHU, like, there is no final thesis. Like, you don't need to submit this giant paper to graduate. But there is a lot of the fourth year courses will require a large final project, which is a report, like a research report. Secondary sources, nothing in the field. And mine was called something like, I remember the first part, but the second part is going to fudge. It's called More Money, More Problems. a critical analysis of microfinance initiatives. And at the time, microfinance was kind of the hot trend. Muhammad Yunus won a Nobel Peace Prize for it. I never fully understood it, frankly, because I didn't understand why you were supporting the same standard enterprise in developing communities. I wouldn't call them developing countries, but developing communities, lending out at a high interest rate and then tying them all together. Like the structure didn't make sense to me, which, by the way, you should be critical of anything that gets that much hype. And I actually got a really bad mark. I got like a B on that paper. And in retrospect, it made total sense because the prof was a big supporter of microfinance initiatives. And a lot of the critique from my end was, if you're, not to belittle anyone, but if you're running like a fruit stand in a developing community and the guy on your left and the guy on your right are both running fruit stands, how are you able to learn without being exposed to different skill sets and different ways to tailor your own little enterprise to make it more effective and be able to deliver on the incredibly high interest rates that were not very different from the loan sharks that dominate those communities? Um, Standard economic theory says you should be learning from large enterprise, and that's really where economic development in the West and in Europe came from. It wasn't from supporting small enterprise, no matter how feel good that comes off, but you should be entering with large players who can create a structure and a safety network for someone to say, I work 9 to 5, I'm happy with my paycheck, I'm really good at managing my budget, and I don't need more. This is enough. And I celebrate that. You have to have your enough, or else you'll be chasing your own tail and someone else's tail, and you'll never be happy. So I'm big on this isn't for everyone, whether that's your personality type. Not every immigrant becomes, a CEO or gets listed in the top 30 under 30 or whatever else. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You are not your job, by the way. I'm going to come back to that. You are not your job. You're not the amount of money. I'm a big Fight Club fan. You're not the amount of money in your bank account. You're not the number of hits, number of likes you get on Instagram. Like, that's not you. You need to figure out who you are and what you create in your relationships, friendships, personal, whatever, what you are on the inside. And that's really who you are. And then those things, your job, your salary, your whatever, those are separate completely from who you are and how you should judge yourself and how you should judge others. That's a big deal. Mine was kind of like a childhood of discomfort, and I found comfort in it. I saw my parents struggle a lot. And this notion, and I was speaking to my high school friend's dad, and he said, I really admire you for the fact that you've taken these risks. He's like, I said, and he's super smart and he's had a number of jobs, but he said, I never made it past like the SVP level. And he said, but I didn't know how to take the risk. And he had a much more stable, I wouldn't even call it comfortable, I would say stable upbringing, like born in Canada. His parents were immigrants in a very difficult time. And but he had a family and he had 2 kids to support, and a wife who was very active, but at the end of the day she also had to be a mother. And like, I understand that. That's why you don't take risks and you pick a little bit more of a stable, predictable journey, and that's fine. Mine was like, I had a much lower bottom that I could be comfortable with. First of all, I had a nest egg. I had money saved up. I'm very frugal. I'm very budget conscious. Everyone who knows me knows my kind of motto on the side is always be broke, no matter what. And that comes from the turnaround work that Scott and I did. Always assume this thing's going under and operate under that basis. Yeah. Watch your cash.
Love that.
And ultimately, I've lived in a basement apartment. I've driven a Kia Spectra. I'm comfortable. I survived that. I can go back to that. Not for like a very long time anymore. You get a little comfortable, but I don't mind falling back on that because I know I've crawled my way out of that before. I'll do it again. So I think as much of a lack of a white picket fence scenario that I never had, and I'm okay with that. That's kind of the silver lining, that you get more comfortable knowing that everything could fail and you have to start from rock bottom. I don't call it rock bottom. Like, come on, we had a roof over our head, but from a much less comfortable position. And that's really where the risk taking comes from. I think also I was just, I had a comfortable enough And I had enough experience of how to build and what angles to watch from, which I think made me a more frugal risk taker. I didn't need to swing for the fences unless there was enough of a safety net for me in any sort of transaction. Like I'm not. There's risk taking and there's gambling. I'm not a gambler.
Yeah. Calculated risks.
Yeah, calculated risk.
Yeah. But that's, again, sounds very simple and easy. And oh, yeah, it does make sense. But I'm sure people are familiar with the feeling, well, what if? What if I'm going to lose everything? What if I'm going to go and live in that basement apartment, like you said? And I think it sounds easier than it is in the real life, but feel comfortable with it. That's what comes with, I don't know, a challenge of acceptance. Like for me, for example, I can also relate to it. Sometimes you think, oh my God, it isn't the end of the world. But then it takes some, time to like, you know what? Not at all. I've done this, I've done that, I've been there, like you said. And it's just like, it gives you that sense of peace in your mind. But I know it's not as simple as it sounds sometimes to have that acceptance of, you know what, if it happens. If everything goes down, I'm prepared. And I know.
And the more successful people you meet, the more successful they are, the more they'll share the most embarrassing stories, and they'll almost focus on that. And they'll always say, I worked for a guy in Dundee, and he used to say, my point of reference is my first car, and it was $3,000. And if anyone at this point pitches me something over $3,000, they got to make an incredible case as to why it's better than my first car, which took me just fine from point A to point B. And it's just the reality. And it goes back to, you need to divorce yourself from, this is who I am, and this is my job, and this is my business, and this is the amount of money in my bank account, and this is what my friends think about me. Like, you need to be really secure in who you are, because if you fail, I guarantee you there will be some fool who will point and laugh and say you weren't smart enough. Sometimes you get unlucky. There's so many other factors at play. And there will be some fool who will point it out and laugh. And I guarantee you they're the biggest loser who's never taken a risk. And any successful person who's fallen on their face 99 times, and you just hear about that 100th where they knocked it out of the park, will say, well, what did you learn from it? They will be a lot more level-headed and share their own experiences. Yeah. And that, it's like the loudest boos come from the cheapest seats. I'm sorry for all the baseball references, but that's absolutely the case. And if you're really worried about the nosebleed section, it's okay to be in a 9-to-5 job. Some people can't get over it. Like it's okay.
Yeah, it is. But again, I think it takes certain mindset in getting to that mindset as well. And I also think not every failure is a real failure. That's another thing. What is the failure? Similar, like, what is success? It can be different for everyone. The failure can be different for everyone. As long as you can learn from it, is it a failure, really? Right? So
yeah. I want to get personal on this because I had a really great career, and like, you're right, what is success? Like, is it personal success? Is it professional success? How does one impact the other? When I was ready to have kids and I was 26, 27, like, I wanted to get it out of the way, arbitrary goal, I don't know why. But when I was ready to have kids, before my first daughter, I had 3 miscarriages, and they never figured out why. I went to specialists, whatever else, blah, 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 nothing. And then when, the process, I did have her, they did additional tests and they said, you're fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with you. We don't know. Sorry. And they stopped because I had a healthy child and stopped asking questions. But it was so strange to me that I had such a strong run up professionally, and then to have it follow up personally. I think it's a really interesting way to look at yourself as a whole. And I think I almost at that point thought of myself as a professional. And, motherhood was just something I could tackle as well. And it's just a completely different beast. Like, if I'm being blatant about it, that it is very different than professional success. And it's a moving target. So, like, you're right. Like, failure is not final. Success is by no means final, because you're a whole person with a plethora of experiences coming your way. And you kind of have to buck up for that. I was talking to a friend of mine, and his mom said something really great in terms of the importance of having a good partner in these things. And she said, at one point, you will find yourself in a life raft in your life, in whatever capacity, and hopefully not physically, but ship sink. What are you going to do? But metaphorically, you're going to find yourself in a life raft. And the person in the life raft with you, and I don't necessarily mean like a romantic partner or husband or wife or a boyfriend, girlfriend, but that could be your friends or people you keep closest to you.
Yes.
The other person in that life raft is either going to be dead weight or they're going to try and help you figure it out. So I think the
Hmm.
company you keep is so important because you will, I guarantee it, find yourself in a life raft, whether that's fertility issues or professional issues or marital issues or health issues. Like there's like life is so multifaceted. Just because you win really big on one end, don't think it or lose really big on one end, it's by no means the end. Like no means,
Yes.
unless you're dead. Like that's really the only time when it's finished.
There is no exit from that. Yeah.
No, yeah, I
Okay.
mean
Yeah.
that's unfortunate.
No, I love that. And thanks for sharing. I think it definitely puts things into perspective. And I think it also puts into perspective from the angle that I like to bring up sometimes in my conversations with friends, and it's ongoing forever, is like, yes, we are trying to live in equal society between men and women, and yet women still have a little bit more burden to carry, and we still run into it. And one of the things that you mentioned is definitely on the private life side. We do carry that extra responsibility, and we need to actually account for it. And when you are a risk taker, when you are an entrepreneur, and if you are living a high demanding, I guess, life in so many areas, it puts an extra pressure on you as a parent, right? Like as a mother. I think it's still a bit of a I don't want to like, I don't like to call things challenges because I don't, it's almost like you're trying to say it's
An
hard. It's
additional
hard,
hurdle.
but
It's an
yes,
additional
let's go
hurdle.
that
Yeah,
way.
you got to
Yes. Yeah.
jump a
Because I
little
don't like
higher.
to be, yeah, because I'm not the person who likes to blame anyone or complain. I like to discuss it in terms of, okay, what are the solutions? Because we do have something to deal with. So I'm curious to know what's your perspective, because you have two kids and you are running businesses and you have so many responsibilities and roles that you are. So I'm curious, how does it work with you and kids, and how do you accomplish all of the goals that you have for yourself?
So I think it comes down to perspective, and you're right that it's how you value yourself, how you define yourself as a good parent, and that might not stand up to the test of someone else. And that's okay. People are going to have their opinions, and you just need to ignore them a little bit. And it's what works for you and what standard you set. I remember leaving my kids to go on vacation for 2 weeks with their grandparents. And I was so worried because they were so young and I was so upset and I couldn't enjoy it. And then I remember when I was 6 years old, my parents left me for 6 or 8 weeks in the summer of '94 with my grandparents, and they went on vacation. And at no point then or now did I hold it against them. I was with family. Things were great. So I'm like, well,
Yeah.
I didn't hold it against them. Why would they hold it against me? And that's completely different perspective. I think that was my experience. That should have been my go-to. Like as a child, I didn't fault them for this. So like why am I a bad person for doing
Yeah.
effectively the same thing for a much shorter period of time? And I think nothing's forever. So your kids have a much longer life and a childhood. And if you're not around for 2, 3 years, I mean, obviously, you're not gonna peace out completely, you're just not gonna be nearly as available, and maybe you work nights and you're a little bit more tired or not as engaged when they're awake. It's fine. You know, you try the best that you can, and that becomes your normal. My parents weren't around all the time, like, my mom wasn't baking brownies for bake sales at school because she was busy working, we had a different
Yeah.
family dynamic. Um, it is what it is. Like your kids are just going to have a unique perspective. They're going to have a unique upbringing. It's not going to be like everyone else's. And I guarantee you that let's just call it a lacking of parenting. Let's call it what everyone's afraid to call it. If we were, every family has their faults. Every parent is not perfect by, some made up standard that no one meets. Why can't you like great. The fact that you started a business and you went away for a little bit, you're not nearly as available is unfortunate, but everyone's got their own little mess up, whether that's some parents like work out too much and they don't see their kids for that reason, or they travel, they have a job where they travel.
Yeah.
Is it their fault? Like great, but you make the most of the time that you get. You go 100% on it, and it
Yeah.
is what it is. And if at some point you check in based on your own metrics with yourself as a mother, a father, whatever you are in a child's life, and you meet your own criteria that is realistic and not from like a Disney movie, you're comfortable with it. And if it ever changes where you say, I really can't do it anymore, then you assess and you make changes and you bring other people on. Maybe you have to fold.
Yeah.
That's okay, because that your ego will be bruised. The nosebleed section will have some commentary from it, but you do what's right for you and you kind of measure yourself up to what works for you. Again, it's all on your own metric, and you just have to beat yourself, whether
Yeah.
that's being a better entrepreneur than yesterday or a better parent than yesterday or whatever else. It's just an ongoing assessment, and don't let anyone else do it for you.
Yeah. Yeah. But you also brought a great point about examples from your own family. We also learn from our parents. And I think when they set a good example for you, and this is how you perceive the reality, you actually do have that assessment. Like, you know what? I was fine. And my mom was working, right? And your dad was working.
Yeah.
Like I was raised by a single mom who was working a lot. And it's two of us as well. So two daughters. And you know what? I think she set the example for us, but how she can actually do multiple things at the same time and being a great mom. And it was nothing, we don't hold anything against her. Same
Whose
ideas.
mom is around 100% of the time?
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
who is doing this? And is this
Yeah.
woman happy when the kids, my kids already are like, well, can you leave us in after school because we have a really great time playing in after school? Like, they don't want to get
Yeah.
picked up before 5:30.
Oh, wow.
Like, whose mom is around 100% of the time? And like, are those kids
Yeah.
happy? Is she happy? And does this actually work for anybody? It really does
Yeah.
take a village. And the advice that I give to my friends who are starting to have kids is, if someone offers to help and they don't have like a lot of convictions on their criminal record, you should just give them your kid,
Yeah.
even for an hour. Take some time for yourself, because your kid doesn't need, beyond the infant phase, your child doesn't need you nearly as much as you think they do. And when they
Yeah.
do, they'll ask, and you have to have an open line of communication, and you fulfill that need. And it's not a ton, I promise.
Yeah. Awesome. I think that's great. So where do you get your energy to start new ventures? How new ideas come to you, and how do you decide which ones you're going to pursue and which one maybe you'll put in a drawer and look at them later on? So I'm curious to know, how do you go through that process?
So I've had a few things come across my virtual desk since I left Switch. And I think I've covered this on a few podcasts before. The things I assess, and it's kind of like a SWOT analysis on yourself. And I think SWOT doesn't get nearly enough. It's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It doesn't get the respect it deserves, because people you learn about it in business school, and it's like one ear at the other. You write your exam and it's over, and you're like, oh, it's one of those consulting templates. But really, if you look at it, and I brought it up with Scott a long, long time. I was like, whoa, I never even thought of that. But the strengths have to drive the opportunities, and the weaknesses is how you assess your threats, because that's ultimately the relationship.
Yep.
And everyone does it kind of horizontally, whether it's a vertical. For me now, when I look at opportunities in any sort of capacity, I look back at my experience. I'm kind of like done having new ideas, aside from like the odd little thing on the side. But like, I look at my experience and what can I really bring to a role. I won't I don't over pitch myself. And a lot of those opportunities are with people who either knew me a long time ago, or have known me or who know people who've known me for a long time. So I don't really need to provide, like a standard resume, but I do
Mhm.
need to say, listen, like, this is what I see as a weakness within your business. And it doesn't have to be like a colossal weakness, it's not a crater, but this is like a role you need to fill in order to be successful. That's what I mean by like a weakness. And this is a threat of what happens if you don't address it properly, you put the right person in. And I can only take like advisory positions at this point, up until now, anyways. So, but what's interesting is that I do have to come up with saying, and this is how I plan to fill it. This is kind of something I've done in the past. This is my strength, and this is the opportunity I bring to the business. And this is how it's going to work. And I think it's really important to be, if I can, I will entertain an idea if I can describe it in layman's terms. Like one of my daughters is 6. If I can explain it to her in the attention span that she has, the idea makes sense and I make sense in that role. And I can actually bring something to the table, which isn't actually very common, or I say like, and only I can do this. But I can come back and say like, if I can't do this, I have someone in my network who I
Okay.
can tap in and we can build something together if you're okay with it. I'm upfront and honest as to what I can and cannot do. And I've learned from almost a decade of experience in doing exactly that thing. I can't do this, and I say I can do a 100-hour week. It's not that
Yeah.
I don't want to, like if I don't have the kids, I could probably
Just can't.
swing
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
but I don't have the energy anymore. There were ventures in my past that kind of sucked some bravado out of me. And I can't bring that back. I'm not 25. Um, that's one. So like the time constraint's a big one, my skill set and my network. And that's kind of how I assess. And when I say skill set, I also kind of mean knowledge base. Like this is how things work and this is how they can't, and you're knocking on the wrong door and you're explaining it the wrong way. And like I can talk to the ownership group or like the investors or management and explain how that would work. I think I'm very upfront and honest about how I approach things. Sometimes I'm kind of a bit of a bull in a china shop, where I'm like, listen, this is like, I'm overstepping. We don't have a signed contract, but I'll tell you exactly what's wrong. And this is like a really big deal. And whether or not someone's responsive to my personality is also a big one.
I was going to say, what do you feel? What type of response you get on that? Because I can see how sometimes people will say, you know what, I love that. I need that. I need someone
Yeah.
like you. But I can also see, and I've experienced it in the past, when they see someone very straightforward, really like up to the point, and the reaction is completely opposite because they don't want to hear what you have to say. They want to be surrounded by people who would say, you know what, no, we want to do it this way. You were right. You were the boss, and everything is going to be as is. So I'm curious to learn how it was working for you when you were giving them, you know what, this is how I think, this is what we need to do, and the reaction that you were getting.
I always preface with, you can tell me to get lost. And I open that door for myself to be able to be escorted out. I open my own exit. But ultimately, if there's no personality fit, you're not going to make it work. Like you need to be comfortable walking away from it. And it goes back knowing yourself. I don't use profane words. I don't call anyone an idiot. I don't say like, this makes no sense. I can't believe it. I'm not insulting. I'm respectful about it. So that's you can be yourself, but yourself can't be a rude jerk, right? It's just humanity. But I walk out and I say like, listen, I'm overstepping my boundary. I'm aware of it. This is just who I am. But I'm respectful about it, and you can tell me to get lost. These are the issues I see in your initial discussion and how you're approaching it. I have 2 or 3 solutions of how to fix it. I also think I've found an underlying problem that needs to be addressed ultimately, but I leave that to you because you're more involved with an idea or a company or a venture. Um, but that's kind of like, and I leave that with you if you want to continue discussions. I could be more frank and more forward, and I can nitpick a little bit deeper. Or we can part ways and we'll be good friends, but we're not going to work together. And it's okay.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah. But I think you have to get to that level of comfort and confidence, right? So yeah, I'm sure it took maybe some time for you to build that, but I love that approach. And what I see here is that ability to put puzzles together. That I like to. It's just my thing. Like I like to compare startups and small companies as a puzzles that you have to put together, and people who work well in those under those conditions. There are people who can actually put puzzles together and can actually say, you know what, this is not right. This is not right, but let's find a solution. And it seems like this is the key, well, for me at least, from my experience, this is the key skill, or is it a skill? Is a character trait? I'm not sure.
It's a recognition after experience. It's something that's kind of learned, not taught. Where you, for example, like I know your background. If you have 5 opportunities, you only really need 1, maybe 2, if you have a fairly open schedule. You're not going to
Mhm.
say yes to 5. So you might as well
Yeah,
weed them out. Worse than losing a good opportunity, it's taking one that drains you completely and takes up all your time away from the one that was going to come tomorrow or a week later and
yeah,
totally crushes your ability to perform in that one. because that's a long-term detriment. And you have to accept that some things are going to suck more out of you, give you back nearly nothing, or a very low probability of giving you nothing. And you're gonna waste your time fighting maybe a management group, just making stuff up, a management group on certain things, whereas you would be better investing that energy and that time elsewhere for more fruitful and a higher likelihood of a positive outcome venture. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that's sorry, that was a word salad, but that's effectively what it is. You need to be aware of the fact that this isn't none of these are the end. This isn't your only five being
Yeah.
pitched. It's okay to walk away from them, and you don't know what happens a month from now.
100% agree. Yeah, that's totally right, in my opinion, what you just described. Because if you are wasting your time on something that just distracts you from your main opportunity where your skills can be maximized, yeah, that's a waste of time. But I also wanted to say, like, what I heard from you, just like being able to provide a solution right away, not being afraid to, say, hey, this is how I see it. I think it's a great skill to have. It's something to offer for sure. And it, again, takes experience and confidence and comfort to actually come and say, you know what, this is how I see it. This is how it doesn't have to be like 100% right, but at least you have a solution. Because I meet some people who do not have any solutions. They only have problems, right? So, and this is where I know we're not talking about something like new here, but that is a reality. People who are asking questions how to achieve certain things, very often they don't have any solutions for problems. They only see problems, but you have to create something like, and you have to come to the table with a potential solution. And I think this is what you demonstrated. That's exactly what you do. You come to the table as who you are, knowing who you are, what type of skills you have, weaknesses and strength that you bring to the table too, like, because you need to know what is your best skill and maybe something that you don't like to do. Like, for example, spreadsheets that you mentioned, like, I don't like doing them. That's not my cup of tea. So I'm aware of that. I can do it, but I'm aware. But I know that certain things I can bring to the table, they're much more efficient. It will be my time will be spent much more efficiently. So being upfront with those things is very important. And what you just described totally makes sense. And especially looking at your career path, how you were able to achieve so many things. I think in a very short period of time, by the way, you said like a decade. Within a decade, it's like that's pretty impressive. So I think that's the key: having solutions, being confident, and going back to perseverance. Maybe we can kind of touch on that as well. So the perseverance part plays a big role. And I'm not sure if, do you learn that? Do you have it inside? Is it something that you just have to go through? Like, what's your opinion, and how to work on that? How to even get into perseverance and persistence?
One thing that happened, people always ask, like, why'd you guys move from the States to Canada? And the reality is we couldn't get a green card. And we never found out why, but that's a big one, right? And I'm obviously we're not the only people who that happened to, but I remember my parents being like down for maybe a day. And again, like they were so young, they were younger than I am now. And they were like, cool, we're just gonna go to a different country. Like you like life goes on, show must go on. They were big Queen fans. So like show must go on. And you kind of just have to keep on keeping on. Otherwise, what? Like, what are you gonna do? Like crawl under the bed sheets and go into fetal position and cry? No, you got a family to support. And that's the probably the first big lesson that I was cognizant of. A lot of people I worked for, but including Scott had this saying where like you just got to keep showing up. Companies don't turn themselves around. This isn't if you
Mm-hmm.
don't you're the last guy on the deck. Like if you're not going to do it, no one else will. And it comes with a
Yep.
lot of responsibility, especially in that business. But it's you just need to recognize that I go back to this, like the wins that we've had, and by we, I mean like everyone that I've ever worked with. The win is so sweet, and once you hit that one time, you don't mind falling down publicly 99 times because no
Mm-hmm.
one else understands it. Again, they can laugh at you, they can make comments about how you were incompetent, whatever else, but they've never gotten that one win. So as long as it's a failure that doesn't hurt you, sorry, doesn't kill you, hurt you'll get over. Wounds will heal. You'll get up. Everything will be fine. But you need to be ready for the wins, and you need to always come in with the mindset, with the perspective that this could potentially be a win. And if you don't give it 110%, you are guaranteed it will be a lose.
Yes, I agree with that. 100%.
Maybe that's
Love
a
that.
personality trait. Maybe like part of it is that you're born with this kind of stuff, or your parents tell you early on, or like, I don't know
Yeah.
where it comes from.
That's a thing that I'm trying to uncover really with all my guests on my podcast. I think that's the common trait that I see in people, being able to, stand up, get up and like, you know what, not this time, next time. And have that persistence, like you said, and perseverance. You know what? Yeah, I'll do it. Maybe because they have nothing to lose. I don't know. It's something inside, or maybe I don't know if it's conditional. You're born with it. Can you learn it? I don't know. It's hard to say.
Or maybe you read that Churchill quote. You read that Churchill quote over and over, where success is going from failure to without losing enthusiasm. I don't
Sure.
know, like maybe you need to be surrounded like in grade 5 with all those posters about how like aim for the moon, you land amongst the stars. Like I don't know what it is, but maybe it's a collection of these little mental notes that you get over the years. But even when I talk to people who are exactly the same spot, I'm like, well, how do you like, why do you think you get out of bed every morning with this, like, and you face a plethora of problems? I have friends who own their own companies. And like, honestly, I don't know. Like we always entertain it as like, well, you gotta be like, you kind of have to have fun with it. You have to be able to assess the risk, the this, the that, and like, well, we never come down to like a proper formula. Yeah.
Yeah. But how do you prioritize the self growth? Because it's like you have a professional growth. Obviously, you get experience while you're doing your job, but self growth and when you talked about the ego part, I think we all run into it one way or another. It's pretty much like 100% you will see that clash of your own ego with your goals and ambition and failures and what you're trying to achieve, and sometimes not being able to achieve what you think supposed to be like what you're supposed to have at this point of time. So you have to prioritize your personal growth and personal changes on top of everything else that's happening in your life. So how do you do that? Because it seems to me that you've found that, well, at least balance that I see. Obviously, it's hard to make a full judgment, but what I
Yeah.
can read from you, like you found that balance between your career, family, your ambition, your self. What would be a good description of that? I guess it would be ego in sense of like you want to be something, someone, you want to leave mark, like you said, but you
Yeah.
found that balance. So how do you prioritize that self development piece? How do you include it in your day to day life?
I think you make a list of the top 3 things that you really need on like a daily basis. Then you have a couple things that you need weekly. Like my big ones, like meditation's a big one for me. And frankly, it's 10 minutes twice a day or 15 minutes twice a day, whatever I can fit in. But anything is better than nothing, right? So you might have your, I'll give you mine. So it's like meditation. Duolingo is a big one for me. I really enjoy it. It's a bit of a pride that I have like my 223-day streak in Spanish, which is a language I don't use at all. And I really like the gym every other day. But if I don't go, if I can't make it out because I have, contractors at my house or whatever else, like you get a little mini workout in and maybe it's 10 minutes or it's 15 minutes, but it's better than
Mhm.
nothing. And that's a standard where you have checked that box. So for me, it's like, first of all, I think what's really important, I think it's a lot of ambitious people have this, is they never take the time to reflect on how they feel because they're so focused on what their responsibility is to other people. Whether that's, you are someone's paycheck, you are someone's parent. You can't pour from an empty cup. So you do have to recognize that, first of all, you're human and you have certain needs, and not even wants, but certain needs, and you have to fulfill those first. And that's a function of humility. You're not a robot. You're not a superstar. You're not Superman. No one is. And that's fine. And if you get hurt personally, professionally, physically can't do it if you're sick, you need to be aware of that and, bring in backup, whatever that means. Bring someone into your life raft that you can trust and that you can rely on. So first of all, recognize that you have needs, that you need something, whether that's coffee in the morning, and you have to have pancakes on Fridays or whatever it is, and make it happen because it's something to look forward to in the times that are very difficult.
Yeah.
And then, uh, yeah, for me, it's just those 3 things. And, I need to go outside at some point. I need to go for a walk in the park for half an hour. I know how much better I feel. I have to have a green shake, every other day. I know how good I feel after it, just small investment. The little things really do make a difference, and you do need to take that time for yourself. And then the other side is I am as guilty as anyone not being able to prioritize what I do when I have a phone in my hand. And once you realize that if you wake up at 6:30, you don't get out of bed until 7, it's because you were scrolling through the gram and laughing at puppy videos, and everybody does this. And if they tell you they don't, they're a liar. Maybe some people like pandas, but we all have our own little time waste. We don't feel better afterwards 100% of the time. It's just a bad habit. And it's important to recognize when this is a bad habit. And if I were just to turn on my meditation timer for 10 minutes, I probably have more energy, get out, plank, do some lunges. And then you start kind of checking the boxes in your head of I've accomplished the things I need to feel
Yeah.
better. Maybe it's all placebo. Maybe none of this matters, but it works. The placebo is very strong. So you make a conscious decision to be like, cool, my phone is a timer today. And at 6:30, I meditate until 6:40. And then I'll get out of bed. And that little bit of discipline makes a big difference. I think
Oh, for sure.
social media is like that is for my generation. Like I don't really care about filters or like I don't have I'm kind of too set in my own ways. Like I think at our age, like body image issues or whatever I see on Instagram, I'm like, oh, this is fake, this is a filter, this is that. That's not my problem. The way it impacts me negatively is when it
Time.
becomes just a massive time suck.
It is. Yeah. Definitely eats up your time for sure. And when it comes to discipline, I guess one more thing I wanted to cover with you is business itself. When you run a business or you're involved in business, large or small, that discipline, how does it work from your experience? Or maybe it's not discipline, maybe you have maybe a list of 2, 3 main things that companies supposed to do in order to be successful and move in the direction that they're choosing, especially in small companies or companies that are troubled companies. They don't know which way to go, right? And this is where I think discipline and certain steps help them to find that direction. So I'm curious to know what's your perspective on that. Like what are the maybe a couple of main things a company can do, businesses can do to stay on track and do well?
Yeah, set your KPIs, and you have to abide by them. Maybe 3 KPIs. It's very industry specific, so key performance indicators, and check in on a regular basis. And if somebody in the management team feels like the standard is incorrect, whether the KPI is set too high, or they come across, for example, they want to see a decrease in margin. They see a decrease in margin because they want to take on a bigger contract, as an example, and the KPI is no longer relevant, that needs to be checked in with. But the larger, I think, now that I say it out loud, I think the larger element is communication. If there's
Hmm.
no communication within the management group, it's almost entirely impossible to make it a success.
Yeah.
Because if you think that you're the only person who can put out this fire and it's not going out and no one else knows about it, that is a real big problem in that you don't trust the team you're with. And I speak of it from the example of troubled companies, especially that there was so many silos within them, and these are small businesses, like maybe like 20 employees, 100 employees, like not these huge conglomerates. And people still don't talk to each other. They sometimes share an office and nobody talks to each other. And it's like making the time to have a meaningful discussion where, no one is again swiping on the gram during the meeting because they don't think it's relevant to them. I find that so often people are like, oh, I'm just here for the meeting. And it's like, well, you put your phone away, you'd realize how important it is to you. How do you know it's relevant to you if you're not plugged in?
Yeah. I'm smiling so much because what you just shared is actually exactly what I thought when you were talking about discipline personally. It almost like translates to sometimes have a discipline in the company too, in the team, maybe, right? When everyone comes to the table and they make time to share certain things and they put away other things and just like now we have a priority of the business or assignment or whatever it is, depending, of course, on the company. But we need to actually talk about it now, all of us, and make a decision. And the faster we can do it, the faster we can progress. So that's why I was smiling so much while you were sharing it,
Yeah.
like 100%. And it seems like communication is still going to be something that we will have to figure out. Because right now we live in an era of AI, and maybe lots of tasks we will be able to replace people with AI, but communication is one thing that we won't. And until we
No.
figure out how to do this, we probably will struggle.
My take on AI, and I actually used it to
Oh
write
yeah,
a blurb recently, is that
yeah,
it's people always say they have, especially when it's like creative tasks or like something a little bit more, no, creative tasks. They have a really hard time getting started. So I think it's a really good like launch pad for if you're going to write, I don't know, say a blurb for a clothing company. I'm making stuff up.
yeah,
But you
yeah,
take that and then you start adding like a human intelligence to it of like what sounds good. Because it's really like AI to me is a collection of everyone's thoughts of what is available on the internet, right? So it's learned from everyone. It hasn't learned from the best. It learns from everybody, which really means it is bound to give a mediocre outcome when it comes to writing anyways, like the chat GPT. So you're going to get a mediocre product. And for some tasks, mediocre is fine. But
yeah,
if you want something excellent, mediocre is a really great starting point because it's hard to get started. We're all tired. We all have a million things on the go. Take that mediocre product and then finesse it. Use it as kind of just like a framework, it's just a skeleton to add
yeah.
whatever it is you intended for it to be. And that is my completely unqualified take on AI, but my personal single experience with it.
But I love it because I mean, obviously everyone talks about it right now. I actually had another
Yeah.
guest on my podcast the other day when we were talking about AI and creativity and art and how it's going to change things. But she shared quite interesting opinion
Yeah.
about it. And I 100% agree. And this is where I still think we will need humans to communicate. And for businesses, we will need to communicate efficiently in order to achieve goals. Otherwise, it's going to be all lost. That's my take on the
It's
future
really
as of
good
now. So
decision making. It's a scaffolding, which is great. You need it,
yeah,
and it's a good way to
yeah.
get started.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, well, thank you so much. Thanks for sharing all of
So
it. I know we kind of coming to end of time, even though I think, yeah, we can probably continue on and
we can
on.
go on for longer, for sure.
Yeah, the last question I usually ask my guests is about traveling, because I think traveling is one common thread that I'm trying to kind of bring to all of my podcasts and lots of my videos, because I think traveling is one way for people to open their minds and sometimes even distract themselves from reality for good reason, like if you want to
Yep.
switch scenery, sometimes to get new creative ideas. So I just want to ask you if if you have anything planned, or maybe you will plan a trip somewhere. Where would you go and why?
So I have in June, I'm taking my kids to Italy. It's her first non-sun and sand
Yes.
trip because they're old enough to have a little exposure to culture. But we're not going to every cathedral or every church. I think it's called ABC, where it's like another bloody church, another bloody cathedral. Um, because I don't think it's interesting to them. It would have been interesting to me when I was 8 or 6, but I think Italy's a great place where you just walk around, eat ice cream, and
Yeah.
look around. You're basically in a giant museum. So that's my trip. If I were to recommend anything to anyone looking for a change of perspective, right after I left Dundee, I was going to take a year off, but I did my scuba certification in the Cayman Islands, and they do like PADI certification. You're qualified to go down a certain level. No one really pays attention to it. So
Mhm.
one of the dives, and I thought it was incredible, and it was so short, like the time that it happened, but it made a substantial impact on me. Is this something called the Wall? It's on the north side of the Cayman Islands. You dive 100 feet, and it's beautiful and peaceful. I know some people are claustrophobic, and there's no way they're going 100 feet underwater. I would do it any day of the week and twice on Sunday. So you go down in the water, and there's fish, there's coral. It's magnificent. The point of the wall dive is that you swim out a little bit after the boat, drops you in. You go down 100 feet, and you swim out a little, and there's actually a deeper, I don't know, crevice? No, like a drop off of 25,000 feet. And you can literally, and
I've
obviously, like,
been there.
it's not like from a horror movie, like it doesn't suck you in, it's just a drop, right? So you swim over it, and some people trip out. I thought it was magical. I've also done skydiving, so it was very similar in like the what happens in your brain because it needs to calculate it. You
Yeah.
swim out, and it's a 25,000 foot drop beneath you, and you're just hanging over it. Like you're just looking down. Like, yeah, it gets darker and can't really see much, but you're aware of what it is, and you're completely safe, and you're just kind of floating above this 25,000 foot nothingness below you, which I was a really magical. And like fish swimming around and everything else, like everything's fine because like, that's what they know. It's not like they're excited for you.
That is crazy because I've been there and I've done that, and you are
Yeah.
I think, more brave than me. Because I actually, when I saw that drop, and I remember that, I
Yeah,
couldn't actually do it. I couldn't float above it. I actually had to swim back. So I feel I can give you like kudos for you. It's amazing that you've done it
it
because
was
I
so
remember that
nice.
feeling. Like this is crazy because yeah, there's drop and there's nothing in that darkness.
Let's do it again. Let's do it again. I'll hold your flipper and you'll be fine. You'll be safe.
Okay, well let's do it. I mean, why
Let's
not?
do it. Cool.
Awesome. Thanks for
Have a
coming.
wonderful afternoon.
You too.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.